There is a place in histories where Xerxes says something that I found interesting, and that is because he gives us a lesson that I learned from another book that is a very popular book. Is a book, The Law of Human Nature by Robert Greene, the guy who wrote 48 Laws of Power. And in the law of human nature, he talks about envy, and he says a very kind of special emotion or unique emotion. It's so different from the other emotions that we experience: sadness, anger, joy, all these other emotions. And the reason why envy is different, and not only from what it is really, but how we interact with it and how we behave with it, is that Robert Greene says it's because envy is the only emotion. Yeah, I think it's the only emotions that we rarely admit that we have. Like we can tell people we are angry, we can tell people we are joyful, we can tell people we are angry or whatever or sad, but we can't tell people that we are envious. Like it's an emotion that will guard very much. Even when we are experiencing it, we guard against letting other people know that we are experiencing that emotion. The other thing that he says, and now this is the part that connects so well with what I'm going to tell you that Xerxes says, is that he says, it's something that I had never thought about, but after reading The Law of Human Nature, it became so obvious, and I was like, yeah, thinking about it, that's how it is. He says, people who are envious of we are never envious of strangers. We are never, or we are hardly envious of people we don't know well. And he says the people we are usually very envious of are people we know very well, especially when we know their weaknesses, or when the people who we've been the same, we are at the same level, and then somehow something good happens for them and kind of elevates them a little bit above us, then we are envious of them. And Robert Greene says the people to be worried about a lot are people who you've been on the same level, and then you kind of rise above them a bit. Those people are likely to be so envious of you. And I was like thinking about it. People you meet, strangers, even if they are doing marvelous things and things are going so well for them and they are making great achievements, you are likely not to be envious of them. But your friends, your family, even your family indeed, your former classmates, if something goes well for them, you are likely to feel envious of because of what's happening. So now coming back to, and you will see how Xerxes gives us a very good observation about that. Coming back to histories now, at this stage, Xerxes is already in Europe. The war is now going on between the Persians and the Greeks. And uh, before the war started, the Persians did get some experience some setbacks. In particular, they lost close to 300 ships to a storm that went on for like 3 days. The Greeks say the storm came about because they had offered they had prayed to some gods, in particular Boreas, a god by that name, and Neptune. And they say it's those gods who sent the wind and the storm, and then the wind destroyed the ships of the Persians and killed so many of them. In fact, Herodotus tells us that at the end of the storm, the people who lived near the sea, at the coast, they went there and they collected a lot of gold and treasure that was in the ships. And remember, Herodotus tells us in another part of the book that the Persian soldiers had this habit of wearing a lot of gold on their body. Yeah, so now, after the shipwreck, the Persians, especially the army that's on the land, marches on. It's marching on. It's a huge army. I've mentioned several times that Herodotus told us this was around 1.7 million. But later on, he corrects that number and says when you combine that number, the initial 1.7 that crossed over from Asia, which included Africans and other nations and Indians and Arabs, and you combined it with the allies that Xerxes formed in Europe, that number almost went 4 times. Like we are talking about 5 million people. It was a huge army. But this army was facing a very small army. Like the Greeks were a very small army. While Herodotus doesn't give us the exact total number of the Greeks who were facing Persians, he gives us the numbers that were coming from specific cities, and they were very small numbers. For example, Sparta gave like 300 men. 300, if you've watched the movie 300. From Arcadia, 1,000. From Armenia, like 100 men, 120. 1,000 from several other cities. From Corinth, 100 men. Like, these were very small numbers. So even if we are talking of 1,000 city-states, if each is going to give these hundreds, it's really nothing compared to what Xerxes was coming with. But these people fought. They were really good fighters. Herodotus tells us the day the two armies met, the Persians lost a lot. While they had the numbers, they didn't have the skill and the strength. Like, their soldiers were not well trained. So the Spartans in particular killed a lot of them. They killed a lot of them. And but at some point there was this 300 from Sparta. They fought and fought and fought, and a few, and at the end, the 300 were all killed except two. And I'm going to create a video, an interesting video about this, the remaining two. Yeah, going back to the size of the army that Xerxes brought, there is this conversation that goes on between some Greek generals, and one guy called Trachinians tells another guy called Dionysius. He tells him, because Dionysius had already not come to the battlefield, he tells him that the barbarians are in such a huge, they are a huge army, such that when they shoot their arrows together, the sky darkens. Like, the arrows forms a huge cloud that makes the sun not penetrate. And Dionysius responds and tells him that that's good news, because then it means that we will be fighting under a shade. It was kind of like a joke, but yeah, like, okay, they are giving us a shade, but these are arrows coming to kill them. Now, after the Xerxes and his army had crushed the 300 from Sparta, the initial 300, because there were others coming, Xerxes was scared, like he was shocked, because yes, they had crushed this army. It was a small army, but he was like, these people are fighting. They've killed so many of our soldiers, regardless of their small number. And he calls Demaratus, and I've told you about Demaratus before. This was a guy who used to be the king of Sparta, but then he escaped. He went to Asia, to Persia, and he was accommodated there. Now he became like an advisor of Xerxes. Initially Darius, then Xerxes. Now, he calls Demaratus because Demaratus is a Spartan, and he asks him, he says, tell me now, Demaratus, how we may with least trouble subdue these men. You know all the paths to their counsel, says you were once their king. He asked him, so how do you think we can beat these people? Like, these people are fighting, they have passion, they are skilled more than our soldiers. How do you think we should go about beating them? And Demaratus gives him a suggestion. He tells him, let's split the fleet that we have now into two, and we have one go to a certain island, and the other one will face the Spartans and the other Greeks. And he says that way there is a possibility of weakening them. And he tells him, but otherwise these people are really good. Don't underestimate them. They can really do a lot of damage to your army. Now, Xerxes is listening to this advice. It was longer than that. He did provide other details that he thought Xerxes should consider while planning the next battle with the Greeks. But there was this Persian guy. He was like a general listening on the sides. His name was Achaemenes. Achaemenes listens, and then after Demaratus is done, he tells Xerxes, wait a minute. He tells him, don't listen to this guy. This guy is misleading us. We've already lost about 300 ships. And what we have, we need to be very careful how we use it. He is suggesting we split it into two. I don't think that's a good idea. And then he goes on to tell Xerxes how everything that Demaratus was suggesting was a bad idea. And he tells him, don't listen to him. Besides trying to give other reasons, but he focuses more on telling Xerxes that Demaratus is misleading you because he's envious of your good fortune. And he tells him it is the nature of the Greeks to be envious of good fortune. So he's telling him, Demaratus is giving you this bad advice because he's envious of you. And you need to recognize that. And that's why you shouldn't listen to his advice or do what he's asking you to do. And indeed, Xerxes listens to Achaemenes, and while he hears this thing about envy, and now that's where Robert Greene's law of human nature is coming in. But he does like everything else that Achaemenes says. And in fact, in the end, he says, I like your strategy. I like your strategy. Now, let me read what he says in its entirety so that you see now what he says about envy. He tells Achaemenes, he says, Achaemenes, your counsel pleases me well, and I will do as you've said. But Demaratus advised what he thought best, only his judgment was not so good as yours. Never will I believe that he does not wish well to my cause, for that is disapproved by both his former counsels and also by the circumstances of the case. So it's like, I like your advice, and in fact, that's what we are going to do. But I don't think Demaratus gave us this. His advice was honest, was genuine. I don't believe he did it because he's envious. And he tells him, he's already given me a lot of advice before, and that advice has been good. And looking at this advice, while it's not good, I understand where it's coming from, considering the circumstances we find ourselves in. He continues, a citizen does indeed envy any fellow citizen who is luckier than himself, and often hates him secretly. If such a man be called on for counsel, he will not give his best thoughts, unless indeed he be a man of very exalted virtue, and such are but rarely found. But a friend of another country delights in the good fortune of his foreign born friend, and will give him, when asked, the best advice in his power. Therefore I warn all men to abstain henceforth from speaking ill of Demaratus, who is my bond friend. So everything he says is what Robert Greene says in his book, Law of Human Nature, about envy. Like, the people who are envious of you are the people who are your level, or they are of your kind, if I may use that word. They are of your kind or at your level, then you become luckier than them. Then they are going to be envious. But somebody who is not of your kind or at your level, in this case, Demaratus is not a Persian citizen. He's just a friend of Xerxes. So because of that, he doesn't have the foundation of being envious of the king. But in fact, Achaemenes is likely to be envious of the king because he's a Persian, he's a citizen, he's holding a powerful position. He might be having dreams. He might be thinking, I've seen Xerxes being a kid who knew nothing really, and now he's like my overlord. You see, so I found that to be interesting. And as I was reading this quote, I remembered The Law of Human Nature by Robert Greene, and specifically about envy, and how we only envy those who are of our kind or at our level, and we don't envy people who are not of our kind or at our level, or who have never been at our level before.